FFAdventureCo is an immaturely mature podcast. Content warnings can be found in the episode description, though this one may not have very many content warnings because it is another chat. Today, I'm chatting with someone that almost everyone listening will know. He takes ideas and crafts them into things that will result in changing his mind and then repeating the process until it's something beautiful and fun. He made a game inspired by a game within a game. He made a game inspired by a movie inspired by a book. And his next game is Budding with Potential. I think you know who this is. It's literally the name of the episode. Ian Moss.
Hey, got the alter ego there for a second. You almost summoned him.
I know there's a part of me that wants to go into the voice of Plunger, just a little bit. I'm like, no, stay. Yeah. And for people who aren't familiar with the show, maybe if you're just jumping in to listen to this chat, Ian plays Drake Wilson on our show, who is I think probably the coolest, most actual badass vault hunter we have.
It's a low bar to clear, I think. I think the main part of that is actual vault hunter. So I'm the one that's doing the actual vault hunting out of in the world.
That is true. Yeah, like no one really goes for vaults in our world. They're more of like, okay, yeah, it's a myth type of thing.
Yeah.
And then I play Plunger, so I've got that voice. And with Honey Heist, I try to stay in that voice for as long as I can, which has been a lot of fun. But it's weird not to go into that voice and actually like this chat as Riley and Ian.
Yeah.
But we did chat a while ago on the Board Game Community Show, but that was before Bunkers and Badasses actually came out. So that's a few years ago now.
Yeah, there's a lot of speculation, a lot of what ifs.
Like, and I think I even remember a couple of times being like, "Oh yeah, I took it to mean this," but it's just like, well, you kind of corrected me in that, which was good for me to learn straight from you about the game.
Yeah,
now the game's been out for a while. I've been playing it for a little while. I feel like I feel like there's no way anybody's played more games than me.
Yeah. I think if anyone was close, I think it would be our project manager, Marshall, because previously he was doing like weekly play tests with a group when he was when he was with Leader Games, who was our partner on the project. He was doing weekly games with a group, and I would sit in on those games. So I've witnessed a lot of B&B being played, more than I've actually played it, I think. But it's close. But yeah, Marshall might give you a run for your money, but I think you probably have him surpassed by now, just by the sheer number of episodes, that you've done.
Well, and yeah, there's episodes that haven't aired, and there's episodes that we kind of have in the backlog. I've played almost 70, or maybe probably more than 70, really, because then there's also games I played off air, with other people.
Yeah,
I mean, yeah, my players are people too. I consider them people. But yeah, let's get the scoop on the making of Bunkers and Badasses and all that. Does that work for you?
Sure. Yeah, let's get into it.
I feel like we talked about this, but we're just going to approach this like it's, the first chat about it, since I assume a lot of people haven't heard that chat we did before. So how'd you end up working with Nerdvana Games on Bunkers and Badasses?
So again, like the person who's played almost as many games as you, Marshall, he approached me because he was first approached by Nerdvana Games. They had talked to Leader Games because they liked the things that they were making, and they had this opportunity to make an RPG. So they reached out and was like, is that something you would be interested in? And Leader, having their own, obviously, massive bandwidth of things they were working on, right? They have games like Root and now we know that they have Oath and Arcs and Ahoy. Those were probably all currently going on at the time, but no one knew about them, obviously, because that's the nature of projects. They felt like they needed to bring someone in from the outside to help with the design of it. And Marshall, knowing me from projects that we had worked on together, he was like, hey, how would you be interested in doing a Borderlands thing? And I was like, yes, like 100%. Like I think I said at the time, I had accidentally been training my entire life for that moment. Because I was a huge, I had played every Borderlands game. Like I I had many, many hours of just sitting and playing just like split screen. There was 3 of us, but it was only like 2 players for split screen on the first Borderlands, and so we would like rotate out like every hour or so playing through the first Borderlands together. Yeah, so that was how I got in contact with Leader Games, and then through Leader Games got in contact with Nerdvana Games, and which I was able to pitch to them what I thought would be a cool system for a tabletop RPG in the Borderlands universe. Which ended up being Bunkers and Badasses.
So did you go with the intention of it being Bunkers and Badasses from Borderlands 2? Or did you go with the idea originally that it would be more Borderlands, like the setting that they're in?
I initially thought it was going to be more Borderlands. So I had done, a lot of my iteration had been done around the classes and characters that existed through there. And I have this thing where I over prepare because I'm like, well, what if they ask me a question about this? You know what I mean? Like, if I don't have all the answers at this very early stage in the process, then how am I ever going to get them on board? So that's the thing that they really enjoyed, was the fact that I like went so deep. I had I had converted the Borderlands 3 classes and just like made skill trees and such. And I showed them that as like, here's what this could be. And then like when I showed it to them, they were like, we love all of this, but it's going to be a Bunkers and Badasses game. So it's going to live within this universe, but we love this, the way that you have encapsulated the things here. So yeah, so like, basically it was just taking that system and now applying it to Bunkers and Badasses and seeing like what is the uniqueness in the fantasy version, right? Versus what would be in the Borderlands version. So obviously a lot of things end up changing.
Yeah. Like what kind of things did you have to adjust?
Originally there were 6 stats because there were like 6 items of like uniqueness in every weapon. So originally it was things like, oh, here's your accuracy. Oh, here's your reload speed. Oh, here's your, like your stats were just like how good you were at handling specific aspects of your weapon. But eventually, as we kept playing, like we wanted the character to have as much worth as the guns do. Like guns are a really big part of the Borderlands system in general, but they're not the only thing. Like you have these really well-defined characters and these really like in-depth skill trees and all this other loot that you can get. And, and the world that you're in is also, very deep and nuanced and has these characters that you kind of like, we wanted it to make you feel like you were building a Borderlands character in this fantasy universe. And so we leaned more into what the character side of things wanted you to have, So that's why you still have accuracy, you still have like a damage stat, but you also have your like speed and mastery to kind of give you the things that are more character based rather than like weapon based.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What were some of the biggest hurdles throughout the design process? Both, I guess, in your original design and after.
I guess there's a lot of like normal hurdles that you get to in a game. Like every game has its own sort of unique set of challenges that it hits you with. But the combining factor for all games is that they're going to hit you with unique challenges every time. Like the only thing that you can expect is the unexpected, but you have to expect it. Like, that something's going to come up, something's going to be a problem. You're going to have an issue and you're going to have to like push through, figure out a way, change things, shift things, simplify things, cut things down, remove things that you really like in a design and just pull those out for the sake of making it easier for everyone who's not you to be able to experience the game.
Yeah, if you could just implant your brain into other people's brains. If that was the rule book, was just like, well, here's this implant.
But I feel like games do that a little bit. Like you are in my brain a little bit if you jive with what Bunkers and Badasses does as a system. Like if you appreciate a mechanic in that game, you're in here, you're in my brain a little bit. Like you've experienced a portion of what it is like to be me. And I think that's the beautiful thing about games is that I can take my perspective and filter it through the lens of just like words and pictures And through that, you can kind of see how I see the world, or, or see how I like the things that I like, or the things that I think are fun, the mechanics that I'm like, this makes me laugh. Like, I love this.
Yeah. You did mention, like having to cut things. Because I think one of the really cool things about this game is that I've played it with people who've never played an RPG before. And I've played it with people who've played like dozens and dozens.
Yeah.
But everybody loves it. And it's approachable for everybody, yet it's not like it's so dumbed down type of thing, like, because I definitely don't think it's dumb or dumbed down or anything necessarily, right. but it's just like, it's very approachable, whether you're brand new to RPGs or you've been around, that like everybody loves it, that I've played it with. Like one guy, he said he played over 30 different TTRPGs. And after one session, he was like, I think this might be my favorite. This is probably my new favorite.
That's amazing to hear.
Did it start out crunchier though, and then you have to whittle it down, or did you have to complicate some things? Like, what was that give and take?
So a lot of the times you end up like, through the design process, you put so much into it. And then through the development process, you're slowly just cutting these things back, because you'll have found a situation where you're like, okay, like we had the 6 stats and then we went down to 4. Like 6 stats was just kind of RPGs have 6 stats. Your character has 6 stats, right?
Yeah.
But when we kind of were just like, yeah, but some of these stats kind of overlap in their usefulness, and they don't necessarily work for when we implemented the check system. Like checks that you can do, what check would you have to reload? You know what I mean? Like what real world thing would that connect to? So once we started being like, checks are fun, and really they play off of just these 4 kind of systems, we sliced down the stats to just the 4, played them off of the checks, leaving damage out, because damage is like a thing that you do. It's not necessarily in some ways it could be strength, but in when it comes to like the checks are usually like your non-combat things, your other ways to interact with the world. And so we felt that like having them tied to the other 3 stats and letting damage just be this thing that was good for you in combat, it let players kind of decide where they want to spend their cool points, pretty much. But then there was also another thing that we used to have, and I think it's something that, when people see the system, they're either like, oh, okay, or, oh, why didn't they include this, was the fight for your life system, which obviously we had in a version of the game. There was a system for fight for your life. But then this game got more ridiculous, like, I guess it started ridiculous because it's me, but and that's the zone that I firmly sit in. But it stayed ridiculous throughout the design and development. So a system like being downed and having to fight for your life, or your character dying, versus just having a system where once you hit 0, you died, but respawning is an inconvenience more than like a reincarnation, or, a Phoenix down or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, yeah. It's just mostly a minor inconvenience, with the ability to apply traumas on top of that, which add to the silliness factor most of the time. That felt like more in line with what B&B wanted to be, rather than the system of being like, oh, well, I'm down, someone can come help me, or I can, hopefully try and kill something to get myself back up, rather than being like, oh, I died, I'll be back next turn, but something's going to be weird, That felt more like the flow of what the game wanted to be when we're talking about like combat and stuff, and like breaking up that flow to just have this other set of rules that affect you as a player that you have to remember if you hit 0, versus the like, oh, you hit 0, you died,
Yeah. Well, I really like that a lot too. And interesting to think about that coming from the combat. Did that come from the combat side, or was there any thought of like, I guess, like, was the outside of combat considered for the traumas as well? Because it's so fun to be like, well, here's this dangerous bridge and you can cross it, and then there's there's broken pieces, like rolling inside to see what's what, and then try and traverse it, and like, oh, you die, like, so now you get a trauma outside of combat, like you die, like there's there's ways that you feel that and it makes it entertaining.
Yeah, well, I think that was part of it, because in the video game world, you're going to respawn, and that's just kind of how video games work. But like in RPGs, that's not normally how most RPGs work. RPGs have a system of permadeath eventually, whether that be, you don't have any revives, or you can't take the dead person back to town and get a healer or something. Like sometimes characters will just be permanently dead. But in tabletop RPGs, you get so attached to your characters because you spent, even in this system, like an hour making it, right? I can make a character in less time than an hour, but really, if it's your first time making a character, you're going to look at all the archetypes. You're going to look at all the classes. You're going to look at different skill trees maybe and be like, I like this skill tree, so maybe I want to go this class. You're going to have these decisions that you've made, and you're going to be creating this character in your head the whole time you're making it. And so if they just have those moments outside of combat, like you're talking about, where it's like, a bridge collapsed and you rolled bad, you died. Sometimes there's just a scenario where it's like, there's no way to really come back from that, unless you as the BM are just like, you grabbed on at the last second. But then you're kind of like bending the world to suit your players, which in most cases is fine. But like, I would much rather have it be like, you rolled bad, you fell off the cliff collapsed, you died, and now you come back and your favorite gun didn't spawn with you. So like that feels more like the story thing than like I was really close to death. It's like, oh no, I died and this bad thing happened, and now we have to move forward, and it affects the story more than that like permadeath would.
Well, yeah, looking at our show too, like not only has it been funny when it happens, from like we made a bunch of custom traumas, right? Like, so because I wanted them to be more like some of your guys' traumas, which I think is great for like normal games, where like they affect stats, but I wanted just more narrative trauma, more of the, like you have to talk in a funny voice. That's one of your guys's, right? Like, so I just added a bunch like that. So one of the times somebody ends up hearing fruit, they can hear fruit, but they just essentially talk like, Pokemon. So it's like banana, banana, banana. And then another one, I think this one is one of your guys's, is that they are flirty. They have to like flirt with people.
Yeah.
Right? We have the funny trauma, and then we have that one, which was also funny, but then it actually ended up leading to like some really cool narrative stuff.
Right.
That like, still gets brought up today, type of thing. Like it's now there's this like sort of romance that happened and heartache and everything. And it's just like, so it feels so Borderlands to me, that like kind of random mayhem, right? That random chaos that like can shape the story, and like death is just it's just kind of a funny thing. It's a punchline.
Yeah.
And killing people the first time is always fun because they're like, what?
Yeah.
And then you're like, but you wake up and you're wet,
Yeah. That's why we wrote that into the Marcus adventure, so that as it acts as a tutorial for players, it also gives you this thing where it's like, it's just a vat, like it's just like a like an outside tub kind of situation, and there's no towels.
No towels. So yeah, I loved that. It's so well written, so funny. And I know that like in the book, looking through the credits, right? The lead writer is Anthony Birch, who wrote Borderlands 2. And then Christy Pitchford, who obviously has worked with Borderlands pretty much since its inception, since, Randy is the CEO there. And then there was Chris Straub, who does like web comics and other stuff, right?
Yep.
Very funny guy. And then there was you. Then you three were like, writers.
Weird. Yeah, these people with all their accolades, and then I'm also here.
Well, hey, it works. But like, what was kind of that the like load distribution between like what did Anthony do, and then what did the other three of you kind of do?
So a lot of it would be like Anthony would have sort of like that top level input where he would come in and we would say, hey, we need, want these kind of beats for this adventure, or especially when we're talking about like the actual adventure of, the Dragon Keep, right? because I believe he was a big part in that originally. So it's just sort of like writing these beats, and then what can we change? What can we, what works for the tabletop versus what worked for the video game. So he would come in and he would have an outline, and we would start building mechanics around it. Or I'd have an idea for like an encounter or something, and he would build sort of a narrative around it. And then Chris Straub had come in to work on it, and he was just kind of, from that outline, he would elaborate on things. He would flesh them out more in some situations. Anthony would also come back and flesh things out. And Christy would come in, and she has a really good eye for like when like a punchline or when like a scene will like hit really well or when it's not. So she would just come in and like highlight like this description could be longer, or like this punchline doesn't work here because you just kind of like run through it afterwards. There's too much here. So she was also like one of the editors. So she would come in and do the editing pass, but also within that, adding or removing jokes that like didn't land or that could land harder, or just suggestions and stuff. It's hilarious to work on. Like the game was obviously, it comes across in this like action comedy sort of vein, which I've always wanted to have an RPG in the action comedy style, because that's invariably how most games that I'm a part of like RPGs end up anyway for the groups that I play with. Sometimes not on purpose. Sometimes they're just like, oh, Ian, you're the leader. And I'm like, oh, that's a bad idea, but okay. But yeah, so then I would come in and I would be designing the mechanics around these things. And then when either the mechanics needed changed or the narrative needed changed, I would come in and like shift it so that it all fit well. So my writing contributions were more on the transition between the narrative and the design to make them as smooth as possible, which is where Christy was great as well. But then like Chris and Anthony were more as in like just the narrative and just getting those moments to hit, whether they be jokes or, moments from the campaigns that the players really liked. And we wanted to make sure that we hit those same beats in our adventures. Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Did you get to play with any of them?
I don't believe that we got to play. I played with Christy, but I haven't played with Anthony or Chris, unfortunately.
Yeah, I was curious. It would be fun, right? It would be fun to play with Christy. Absolutely, like that. Yeah, that'd be awesome. What did she play as? Do you remember?
I don't remember. This was a long time. This was also like a lot of this game happened during the pandemic. So a lot of it was remote, and a lot of it was like I kept my head down working on this thing for like the entirety of 2020 previously and after. And I looked up and I was just like, oh, what year is it?
Yeah, totally fair. I remember because I think it got announced like at the start of the pandemic. It was at like PAX West or East. It was at a PAX.
Sure.
Yeah. And they had like this goofy video, right? Introducing it and everything. And I was so excited. But that was like, I feel like that was maybe at the start of the pandemic. I don't remember. But then, with all the delays and everything that comes with the pandemic and whatnot, it didn't come out for, 2 years after that announcement, I think.
Yeah.
Which also means that like you guys were probably pretty far into the development before it gets announced. A long time working on it. Did you, with writing, going back to writing though, did you get to come up with any jokes necessarily? Or like, do you feel like you got to hit humor, or were you kind of more of the like, I need to keep this technical and then let them punch up stuff?
No, a lot of times, like, I will, like, in my outline of, like, mechanical things, I'll have jokes. So when I write an adventure, a lot of it's just, like, the beats of an adventure. Yeah. Some of those beats are mechanical of, like, and now we get into this encounter, and it's got this special little twist, or, now they have to race to this place, and they cross this, like, rickety bridge kind of thing. And then other times it's, like, I really just want Marcus to send them down to the basement to like kill rats, your favorite RPG level 1 RPG character stat thing. And then I came up with the like over 200 jokes, 20 of them are good. Because like those 20, like that was like one of the taglines on the website when you go to it. It's like features over 200 jokes, 20 of which are good. And like Tina handwriting.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I wasn't saying the 20 jokes that I made were good. Those are like the 20 jokes that are good are Anthony's.
That's how I took it at first.
But there's 200.
There are 200 jokes. More. That like this book is so freaking good. And everyone that I talk to that's read it is like, this is my favorite book to read, source book, because it's so funny. Like it's easy to read. It doesn't. I find sometimes when I'm reading other things, I'm just like, oh, this is so technical. Like I'm trying to just process what it's saying. But this one, you're reading it and then you laugh out loud and you're like, oh, look around it because you look dumb because you're just like laughing at a rule book, essentially.
Yeah. And like it has this unique sort of thing where it can reinforce mechanical ideas to you through jokes. So it's like if there's a section, like a section talking about like the badass moves or whatever, that can get really wordy, really difficult to like go through the steps on your own. But if Tina's like in there inserting like, oh, like, a non-badass move would be like Brick does his taxes, so you're like, oh, okay. So it gives you the line of which like what is a badass move versus what isn't a badass move. And then it's reinforced by like the jokes of like, here's what a badass move would be. And here's what badass moves aren't. So it's a joke, but it also works as a tool to help reinforce the system, which is really cool. It was a unique opportunity to do that in ways where we were like looking for that in certain places where we could add in the Tina thing to kind of be like, if we have her say a thing, we could, it could give an example. Yeah.
Yeah. It reinforces. That's really clever. Bravo. I think that's so fun because it's one of those things that's like, oh, shoot, I'm being tricked into learning,
Yeah.
I want to ask some questions about maybe some specific design things, like how did you go about doing the classes, building classes and all of that?
So we kind of figured out the classes that we wanted to have initially. So originally it was obviously one of the classes from 2 because they were, the ones that were there in Borderlands 2 and also in the Assault on Dragon Keep. But then also you see the characters from Borderlands 1 play a big part in Borderlands 2 as well. So we're like, we should also have these available as classes. So it was basically like Borderlands 2 classes, Borderlands 1 classes, the DLC classes, so you have the Psycho and Mecharomancer, which are, I think, by far people's favorites. Just because, like, I don't think you've had DLC. I guess the pre-sequel had DLC characters as well, like DLC classes.
Yeah.
But, like, people love the Psycho and Mecharomancer. Like, it's very... I don't know that I've ever seen, like, a party composition that didn't have at least one of the 2 of those.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think Psycho tends to be really popular, I feel like, when I've played. And then I think sometimes people struggle and realize like, oh, shoot, psychos don't really talk that much or like speak coherently. Yeah. And they like, so sometimes I feel like some people regret it, but it's like, guess what? You can make it your own psycho. Like it can be like Matt, right? Obviously is quieter. And so it's kind of like, well, when he talks, when Good Boy talks, he's a very different psycho than you would imagine. But that just plays into like, you could totally see yourself running into a psycho that's very different from the other psychos. You know, like I love it. It just leads to that creativity and that, like, whenever I help people make characters too, I say, think of the Borderlands 1 and 2 characters. You can be any of those, but also you're not that character. You can be anybody, right? Like you make this character your own, and it doesn't need to be like you don't need to be Maya, you can, you could be whatever you want.
But in terms of building the classes out, after obviously we decided what classes were going to be included, which was very easy, building out the skill trees and their class stats, it was just a process, like we obviously had these 4 stats and how each class kind of falls into them, you can almost guess, you know what I mean? Like you can look at, I mean, at least our interpretations of these characters, our art that we have for each of the classes, and you can kind of infer that like, oh, this one's gonna be more damage focused. This one's probably got more mastery, you know, speed, assassin, accuracy, you know, like just name and appearance. You can kind of see what buckets they're dropping into. But then their skill trees were just a lot of times interpretations of their class skill tree from the games. Sometimes that meant like shifting things away because a lot of things that work in video games don't work in RPGs and tabletop, right? So I think Necromancer's like Anarchy would not have translated because it was like this thing that you would build up stacks of, and it would give you this bonus, but it didn't, like having a player track that in addition to their other skills that they're already tracking or keeping in their head or having written on the front of their page as they're erasing and, you know, writing new things. And the front of their page just looks like, you know, Ashirian stairwells at this point. You just want it to be easier, right? So a lot of times with the classes, we tried to simplify what they did, just convert them into bonuses that you just have, like bonuses to your stats or your checks, and then give you an additional like, oh, this per skill level, this per skill level. And so when you're going through your turns or going through combat, you're just like, oh, I'm behind this person, so I get this bonus, and then my weapon, which is a shotgun, gets this bonus. You know, we want it to be like as you level up, you make a note or you write it on your gun or you write it on the front of your character sheet, and then that's just going forward. Whereas like something like Anarchy, where any of those things where you're like building up stats or stacks of things, is just it didn't work as well. Like we tried versions of it and it just felt like too much to keep track of for the player. Like if the BM had to do it, that's fine. We'll just put that on the BM, make their lives harder. But we didn't want it on the players.
Did you ever explore doing more than one tree like in the games, or was it always kind of just like one tree?
I mean, sometimes some classes, like the BL1 classes, didn't even have enough base skills to like fill out a tree, right?
That's true.
They had less skills than the ones in Borderlands 2. And obviously once you get to Borderlands 3, there's just like multiple pages, right?
Yeah.
And multiple pages and multiple action skills. So yeah, we went kind of with Borderlands 2 as the baseline for like the number of skills, and the number of skills per class is kind of dependent, but we kind of created some skills for the BL1 classes to kind of bring their utility up. Their normal skills were good and their translations were, and for the most part, pretty simple, but we just wanted to give them as much utility and as much uniqueness across their skills to where you can play the way that you want to play or build a character in a certain way that's different than the way I built it.
Yeah.
That the BL2 characters had.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I feel like archetypes play into that as well. You know, you can have a psycho, a guardian psycho, and you can have an enforcer psycho, and they'll play a little bit differently based on what feats you take and you know what that kind of does to your stats as well.
Yeah.
Was it always 4 archetypes? Did you want to do more or less?
Yeah, it kind of felt like, you know, with archetypes, when we were saying like these are going to be like the top level descriptors of things, 4 seemed right because it gave each stat their archetype where they're the strongest, you know?
Yeah.
So we're able to play off of like, we know you're going to have a good mastery stat. So what are these feats that you can do because you have a good mastery stat? Like, how do we play into that? So that's where like 4 worked out because I was just 1 per stat, and each archetype gets to like play around with that stat a little bit more. So it does a little bit of some things that are like more useful if your mastery stat is high, or more useful if you can run 6 squares every round.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, that reminds me. You talked about the damage mod or the damage stat, right? I know that some people complain about it not being used for more checks. Like it really is just like kind of combat focused. Was there any concern with that, or did you want to do more with it at all? Or
I mean, it was something we had talked about during development, was wanting like what else could damage do. But like the problem is like if you put a lot of points into your damage stat, you are already an all-star in one part of the game, which a lot of the game design is focused around, right? Like you have a skill tree, 90% of those skills aren't going to help you talk to someone better, right?
Yeah.
They're going to help you talk with weapons better, right?
Yeah.
They're going to be making you better at a very specific part of the game. So like damage itself not being part of the checks was more a fact of like damage and combat are already an important pillar. And basically having the checks with the other three sort of made them a pillar that could stand alongside damage rather than, even though it doesn't look that way mechanically, if, once you see the skills and the archetype feats and all of these other things come together and, how much of the book is dedicated to the combat and the weapons and the items and everything, your damage set is just fine. It does a lot. It does the heavy lifting, pun intended. Whereas these other ones, you kind of have to give them these extra benefits to be like, oh, this is why this is important.
That makes a lot of sense.
Because it's not as obvious. Damage, you just say damage and you're like, increases the amount of damage you do. And people are like, cool, got it, check, next one.
Yeah, exactly. Like it is the easiest to explain. So yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I just figured, I had you here, I have to ask it. So
sure.
When you did Bad Assets, one of the times I think you did it as also kind of like a constitution save type of thing where they ate some meat, right? Like some mimic meat.
Yeah.
And then you were like, okay, roll a damage check type of thing to kind of determine. So you can always like homebrew or like use those stats in other ways as well when you see fit.
Yeah, and I've said this before, like my favorite part about RPGs is that this book is it's not a book of rules, it's a book of suggestions. So like, here's a system where you can play and have some fun. Twist it however you want. Just know that when you twist it, it may change the amount of fun that you're going to have. So you may grind up against some of the systems. And during your normal play, you may grind up against some of those systems on your own. Just because like this doesn't work the way that you want it to or the way that you thought it would. And that's where the twisting begins. Like just start twisting it from there to pull those gears apart so your system runs better the way you want it to. Which is, again, like when we were doing Bad Assets, and the way that I BM most of the time is I am more about the moment than I am the mechanics when I play. Like the moment of them getting fed mimic meat and having Hermes, who's played by my friend Davey, who really like fell into this like chef persona, which is fantastic. It's like such a great character. Having him roll to see how well he prepared that meal, which was not very well. And then having a secondary thing to be like, hey, anyone who ate this, now you must roll to see whether or not your body can handle this slop that's been put in it. Which felt like a constitution like thing, which just felt like a damage thing at the time. In other circumstances, it might not have felt like that, right? Like,
yeah, absolutely. I feel like also just bringing up Hermes, there's that on Netflix. I keep seeing it, and I've seen people post about it, like
Delicious in Dungeon. I know what you're gonna say.
Yes, yeah, exactly. I was like trying to remember the name, and I couldn't remember it. Yeah, so literally every time I've seen that, I've thought about that. Like, oh yeah, like when he cooked up a mimic, like. What if they kept playing, and then he just keeps cooking up the monsters they're killing?
Yeah. Delicious in Dungeon is fantastic. When I heard that there was like Netflix was going to make an anime, I was like, Delicious in Dungeon. And I read the like synopsis of what it's about. I'm like, oh, I added it to like, like a wish list of like things to buy. And then I ended up getting the first volume for Christmas. And so I read through it, and it was I could not wait for the show to come out. And the show's been fantastic so far. We actually watch it like as a family. My partner and my 7-year-old daughter, we all watch it. It is getting a little bit creepier and more adult in its violence and things and its themes than it was initially. But it's still really fun. It is such a good watch.
Oh, that's cool. I'm kind of curious to watch it, and I just don't think I can get Kimmy to watch it. So I'll have to watch it by myself, I'm sure. But it does look fun.
Yeah.
And I love the premise. Like, I think, if an actual play isn't already doing that, they should be.
Yeah, if I ever, if Bad Assets ever comes back, I said we stopped doing it so we could play on our own, but then, life has happened and we haven't really gotten back together to play. Anyway, but there have been 2 babies born since then, so there's a lot of life is happened between here and then. but if we ever do get back and play, it will vastly become part of how I make Hermes deal with cooking and things from now on.
That's so great. I love it. And I think that's one of the really fun things about Borderlands in general is that it is like a culmination of pop culture, right? That even though this doesn't take place on Earth, you still have all these references that they make in the video games, right? Like, oh, double rainbow, you know, like they do all of these different references from YouTube or just various pop culture. So it really lends itself to that humor in your own games. Like, who cares if, you know, in worlds it wouldn't work or that wouldn't be a thing. It's just like, just make the reference, you know?
And there's some specific rules around like what you can and can't reference and, you know, what is within the Borderlands universe and what wouldn't be, which makes sense. But where I got away with it was the red text table in the source book.
Oh, yeah.
I think I had posted this before in like the Homebrew Discord, but I think I just posted a screenshot of the red text table because it is literally just 100 references of things that I like, or like 100 pop culture references for me. And I posted it to just see like how many people could get. And I think they got about 20 or 30, but I think there's probably still quite a few of those that are floating out there that people just haven't figured out the reference for.
Ooh. I'm going to have to go on and look through and write down what references I can figure out. Ooh, man, that's fun.
Yeah. With that and guns, that's where I got to like put in that's where a lot of my jokes are. A lot of my jokes and references are in the weapons, their like naming and their mechanics. And it's like in the red text table specifically too, is just like either the name is a reference or the name and the mechanics are referentially linked.
Nice. So yeah, like all of them are a reference. Like the red text though is even just by itself with the red text, like it is a reference to something.
Yes, but sometimes it takes the mechanic text to like figure out what that could possibly be a reference to. Like it is a reference, but like the mechanics can hint you towards something or give you even deeper reference.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Anywhere where you see guns or red text or anything that that we've had to make mechanically, there is references inside of it, including shotgun sensibility.
Yes. Yeah. Which we'll talk about in just 1 second. Okay. We'll get to it.
Sure.
We have so much to talk about. That brought up though, I know that you are a wrestling fan. Love it. Right?
Yeah.
This is where I was like, oh man, is this Ian or was this Anthony? In the traits, there's the Tiny Tina inserted traits, which are so great. Like, you're not my real... it's not you're not my real dad, but like the prove you wrong.
Yeah.
And then there's one that's a wrestling one. Was that you or was that...
I believe that one was Anthony. I used to be a big wrestling fan and then I had gotten out of it for a few years. I came back recently with like the rise of AEW. So I'm a big AEW fan now. But yeah, there was like a span of time and then Sourcebook included where I wasn't as big of a wrestling fan. I had stopped watching, so I stopped keeping up on things. But I loved the idea of there being like a wrestling themed trait. And obviously, if you have seen or listened to Bad Assets, you'll know that became very quickly a huge part of those characters because we had two of them who one of them picked it and the other one rolled it randomly, who both had the wrestling trait. And it became a big part of their backstories, big part of of their combat strategies, let's say.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting to me because that's the thing with both background. Sometimes people, when I'm making characters with them, they'll look at the background, they'll read everything about it and be like, well, like, I don't know, this doesn't really fit what I had in mind for my character. And I'm like, that's okay. Like, you can literally just take this. This is mainly just for a positive and a negative bonus. So even if this doesn't fit your, bookworm, if that doesn't fit what you envision your character as, we can just use that kind of as like a template and you can ignore it, but it gives you some sort of bonus. Like we can like narratively, flavor wise, we can flavor bookworm to be whatever you want to contribute to those or attribute to those stats. And I think same thing with traits, but with traits, it's funny because you roll a random one and then you choose one. And like Good Boy, he is a psycho. He has the wrestling trait. And it's like sometimes he remembers to use it and sometimes he does. I think more often he doesn't remember to use it, but like it's still one of those things that's like, oh yeah, when it comes up, like you can lean into it or you don't have to.
So here's the thing to remember for everyone out there, and you do this perfectly because you said you homebrew a lot of things, even like homebrew classes, is that like every table in an RPG has like 100 blank blank rows in it after the stuff that you see. Like the stuff that you see is there, but then there's like 100 blank rows for you to just put in everything that you want to have in there as well, which is how all RPGs are. But if you're playing and you're like, I don't really know about that background, it's like for each class, there's like, I think like 4 choices. And the reason there's 4 choices is so you like look through them and be like, I don't really like any of these. Make another one.
Yeah.
There's a 5th, 6th, 7th. It's all empty. It's all there for you. You just gotta fill it in.
Yeah, exactly. Like with Mercurius, we ended up using none of them, and he's just the clumsy lawyer. And so I was like, oh yeah, like going off of these 4 things, how do we apply that? Like what kind of positive thing and what kind of negative thing goes into that? And I think it's very well done. And I love, like obviously you're a big TTRPG fan because you know about homebrew and you accept that and you love it. You love that you encourage it, right? Like I like, in an alternate universe, there's Bizarro Ian who's just like, these freaking people need to stick to my rules. Like, that's not rules as written. Which playing with you is really fun too, because some people ask that, or even there's times where we're like, we've been playing it this way, but like, what's the actual rule? And you're like, you're always so hesitant to tell us even sometimes because you're like, it doesn't matter what the real rule is necessarily, because if you're playing it that way, it's the way you play it, like, so yeah. I love that about you, Ian. I admire that.
A lot of times support emails will come in with people with questions and my answers won't be probably what they hoped for. My answers aren't just like, here's the way that I intend, here's the way that it is, and this is the law. A lot of my answers are like, my intention was this when we made the game, but if this works better for you, then go for it. Or if you just want to go a completely different direction, here's this idea, So I instead of like giving one answer, I'll be like, in my intention, what I think is most fun, and then another way to go.
Yeah. Well, kind of along those lines, we talked about it earlier, but was there anything that you really loved when you were designing it, but you had to take it out because of crunch or whatever reason?
Probably.
I know, it's so long ago, right?
Of the whole process is kind of murky at this point. The game was a lot of things at a lot of points. The core was always like, what is the most fun? What is easy and fun to do? We did have ammo at one point, which I kind of liked. It felt very thematic, but it just didn't. It was, again, too much. It was too much of a barrier for entry to think about how much ammo you have left, taking reload actions and all of this. The system was like, it was a very simple idea, which is just you have ammo for your guns, duh. And then the solution was, it's fantasy. You don't need ammo, duh.
Yeah.
But some people want that. Some people want to track, how many shots they've taken and when they have to reload. And that's part of the tactics and stuff, which I think is fine. I think that's great as like a homebrew, but like for the normal audience, which is just the people who will take this book as gospel and don't want to change anything, it's the easiest experience for them, right?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I have definitely played around with the idea of ammo just to kind of force people to use guns that aren't necessarily their favorite guns, their favorite weapons. But it runs into that, like, that is so much tracking that you have to do.
Yeah.
And I think the closest I came to was that it's just like as easy as like you have 3 ammo of each weapon, right? Like, and then you only spend that ammo when you roll a nat 1 and have to reload, right? Or you choose to reload with a Furior type of thing. Like, and so essentially 3 nat 1s with 1 gun is going to deplete your ammo and then you'll need more. And I was like, yeah, like even then, right? There's 6 weapons. So it's like, that's 6 weapons that you're kind of tracking. And I don't know, ultimately I would like, it's one of those things where it's like, I can do this better than Ian did. And then when I go to do it, I'm like, okay, Ian was right. All right. Bravo.
Trust me, there are some things where you can go down that road, but we already did. And we found the answer.
Yeah, exactly. Like you have years.
There's a reason it is the way that it is. Yeah, which again, it is also kind of like the length of combat. It's like a combat can take a while, just players' turns, deciding what you want to do, some of the minutia of once you have all those skills and abilities. But like, really, I don't know that combats take more than 4 or 5 rounds unless it's like a bigger boss fight or like a sub, the big fight of the evening kind of situation.
Yeah.
Of the session. And so, like, if you have like 3 ammo, you're going to reload once in a combat, maybe. And so, like, why is it just you use the weapon and it's just assumed that you reload once the combat's over, right? Like, it is, or it's magic and you don't have to worry about it. You roll 1, you got to reload. Dang it,
Yeah.
But then we just made it a mechanic of like, oh, it's you roll a 1. This is what happens. This is why you don't deal any damage. It's not like a critical failure or something where you dropped your gun. It's just sort of like, oh, you ran out of bullets and you have to reload.
Yeah, exactly.
Your magic. You have to reload your magic.
Well, and I like that it's, like it gives the BM a mayhem point, which eventually, I think when I started, it's one of those homebrew things where I was like, yeah, that's great. Like, oh yeah, you have to reload. But then I was like, narratively for a podcast, it's way more funny when they get a 1 and something bad happens. So and I already have like a crap load of mayhem points. So I'll just spend a mayhem point every time they roll a nat 1 and make something bad happen. Like they shoot their friend or something, like just add to the mayhem, which is entertaining. But it's just a homebrew thing, right? Like, because the mayhem points, I think, also give the BM kind of it doesn't make me feel like all powerful necessarily. It makes me feel like I have these points I can spend. I want to spend them wisely to make things more entertaining for them.
Yeah, it's reactionary. You spend them in reaction to like what the players are doing. Like if they're stomping on this boss that you spent a lot of time on and you really wanted to be this thing, but they're like dwindling his health down, spend a few mayhem points and maybe he has more health, or spend a few mayhem points and spawn some people to just, to get in their way so that the boss doesn't die in two hits.
Yeah, exactly.
Or whatever, because they have this crazy combination of things and they're just giving you mayhem to take extra actions,
Yeah. Well, I think that's something that my players don't necessarily realize, and if they're listening to this, they might, is that like those extra actions, even though they give me mayhem, like an extra attack is a huge thing, right? That's essentially like 2 turns.
Don't tell everyone. They can't know.
Oh no!
Only BMs listen to this. Players, don't listen. They're more powerful than you.
For real. So yeah. With enemies and talking about combat, most of our rounds, this is like a little insight here, is that I try to keep them 2 to 3 rounds of combat, right? And I think just narratively within what we try to fit within a podcast, right? Like an episode, we can't go too much longer than that unless I introduce some sort of like, a boss fight. There might be that like midpoint where something big happens and then we can break the boss fight into another part, or reinforcements come. And so now that's an exciting cliffhanger. Playing for a podcast is a little bit different, right? Like you have to play to the narrative, sort of like the audience at times. But when you build enemies, how was that? Like, I'm curious what like badass rank, how you determine badass rank and certain things like that.
So for badass rank, a lot of it was we built a lot of things and the combats and stuff. We started with Assault on Dragon Keep because that was our touchstone to the game itself. Like we knew we were going to have this adventure, and so we knew we were going to include this. So as we're building this out, we start there. And so we start with like, okay, here's when you're going to encounter these enemies, you're going to have this combat, you're going to have this puzzle, this system, go through this location, right? This boss fight. And so we kind of started there and we just continually were just like, okay, well, you just had this fight and now you move over and now you're going to interact with this, you're going to do this. And then the next combat is going to be this one. In the game, it's these enemies. So we should probably put these enemies in here next. And then you have these. So a lot of it was like kind of progressed using Assault on Dragon Keep as like the litmus for difficulty.
Okay.
Which was like, so you start off and there's like some skeleton enemies and stuff, and then you have like knights and archers and all of that are like bigger enemies, and then as you progress, things get slightly tougher and slightly bigger, and so that's the sort of the scale that we started using was just kind of what started there, which started with the skeletons being low level enemies, the knights and archers being a little bit higher. And then you have dwarves, so they're a little bit tougher than the knights and archers because you encounter them later. And then obviously dragons are big enemies and stuff like. So that was kind of the natural arc for that, was just going through Assault on Dragon Keep and seeing like, we're going to need these enemies here, so we're going to have their difficulties reflect, where you find them at in this adventure. And so going back from there, we kind of expounded on, okay, well, now we want to have this learn to play adventure, so we're going to need some enemies for that. So we push back and like find some new enemies there. We have the honey heist adventure for after this, so we add some new enemies there. And then we add in some more ones to kind of like round out the list of enemies in general. And just kind of by that point, you have kind of this bar of difficulty going from like left to right of all these enemies. And then when you're thinking of a new enemy, you're just like, oh, I think that would fit here. And you just kind of section it in between two enemies in difficulty. And then from there you have kind of like, you can work out the badass rank, and it's like, oh, this is a 12 and this is a 16, so we'll make this like a 13. Okay, if it's a 13, this has this much health, this is this much health. Okay, so what will kind of be in between there? Or like, what's the twist of this one? Oh, it has a special effect where like, it takes less damage from this, so we can give it a little bit less health for that. And then you go through the abilities, you kind of see like this thing to the left has this much of an attack, and the thing to the right has this much damage that it's dealing. And so you kind of build it in between there. And so that's basically how it was. It's kind of just like that system of, finding 2 points, putting a thing in between there where you think it'll fit, and then building it as the natural in between these two like enemies. It's basically how we did it.
Nice. Yeah, that's really cool. And that's kind of how I've done my custom enemies, is I'll go through the book and I'll look through, what you guys have and find in Assault on Dragon Keep. I'm like, okay, well, they're level 4 right now, so let's look through. Okay, here's about where they should be level 4. What are those enemies like? And then I build off of that. So that's cool. Yeah, I'm glad I do it similarly, I guess.
Yeah, it's a thing that a lot of people ask is, how do you build enemies? And my answer that everyone hates is it's a feel. It's like a feeling, which is easy for me because I'm a game designer and my job is to like have a good feeling for mechanics and how to make a thing. But for anyone who's like just looking at like a blank sheet and being like, how do I make an enemy here? Is the basic is you kind of compare a similar enemy that like your players just fought, or that your players would have a tough time with or something, and you kind of mold it from there, going up or down by some numbers, until it feels right. And then if it goes completely wrong when you try it out and it's like too tough or too easy, well, normally you're sitting behind there's like a screen, or like you have this information off to the side, like they're not seeing everything about this enemy. You can just change it. You just change the number. Yeah. It's fine. Because even when we make enemies, that's why you have to play test. Like I can't be like, here's how to definitively make enemies and they're always going to be good. Because I, as the person who made all of the enemies, have thought that like, this is an enemy, this is going to be good. And then you playtest it, and you're like, oh no, that didn't work for these reasons.
Yeah.
Even now, if I make an enemy, I still need to playtest it. Like there's probably 90 to 100 Bunkers of Badasses enemy stat bars that I've made so far, right? Mm-hmm. I still had to playtest every new one. Like, because there's a 90% chance I don't get it right on the first go. Like something will need tweaked. Something's too much or too little, or it doesn't give the challenge, or it gives too much challenge. Like it's not going to be perfect, and there's not going to be a system I can tell you or write out that's going to make perfect enemies. It's just sort of, I can start you on the path.
Exactly. Yeah. It's funny hearing that too, because I think about, of course, my own experience with like, I think it was episode 3, they fight the Jackbots, and they're supposed to be like these badass robots. And I had kind of designed them without necessarily referencing stuff in the book to be hard for like one person. And so the party had been split, and it was like 2 people, 2 and 2 group. And there was one of these robots against each pair, and they just completely slaughtered it. And then afterwards I was like, oh my gosh, like all the math that I had run through was based on it being a one-on-one fight, right? Like,
yeah.
And also, I think the game is kind of designed to throw a lot of enemies at you at times, right? Like bosses, a lot of times they're mayhem a lot of times you can throw mayhem, or they have ways of like summoning reinforcements to help kind of distract the vault hunters from focus firing them.
Yeah.
Because focus firing one enemy does a lot of damage in a round compared to what one can do back. And so like a lot of, it's that same thing of like trial and error where like eventually I was like, okay, well, if it's just going to be one person against the four of them, then either some reinforcements need to come, there needs to be some sort of invulnerability stage where they have to do some sort of puzzle to figure out how to attack them, or they just get to do like 2 or 3 attacks or attacks that hurt everybody rather than just one person, right? Like,
yeah,
it's that same exact thing of like, I ran the numbers, this looks good. And then you start playing and you're like, well, cool, you broke it. You broke my toy, guys. I'm taking my ball, I'm going home.
Numbers are perfect and invariable, but they will always lie to you. In an RPG, they will always lie. Board games are a little bit different, but like in tabletop RPGs, numbers aren't necessarily what matter. It is, it is the actions that you, the person running it, take, and it's the actions that the players take that kind of define the difficulty of any given scenario.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Oh man, I feel like we could keep talking about stuff like this, but let's talk about the modules real quick. There's 2 modules right now. Neogun, welcome to Neogun City. You got to use the players are playing as Fret, Valentine, Dragon Lord, and who's the 4th one?
Paladin Mike.
Paladin Mike, thank you. Oh, how could I forget Paladin Mike? So like they're playing as those, and they're using the classes from Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, but that was part of the deluxe edition, right, of Wonderlands.
Yes, the treasure trove edition of that is where that currently lives.
So, I mean, you got to design something that was part of a deluxe edition for a AAA game. How does that feel?
It was pretty cool. It was very much like, hey, we have this opportunity to do this. Let's go. And it was just sort of like, and then we just went. Again, we had a cool idea for an adventure, we are not beholden to the fantasy genre, as you can see with the modules that exist currently. We are not fully beholden to the fantasy module. I do believe that it is the system can tell a lot of different stories. A lot of people just want a Borderlands adventure, which you can do. Like, this system will let you do a Borderlands adventure if you want a Borderlands adventure.
Yeah, absolutely.
You just kind of have to make up your own enemies, or like, maybe the golems or the robots now, or whatever it is. You shift the things back over to the Borderlands universe that we've shifted to fantasy. But we've made a cyberpunk adventure, and we've made a Regency era romance adventure.
Yeah.
So we are definitely not beholden to the fantasy thing. And so we had a cool idea, and we wanted this to be kind of self-contained as well for Neogun City. We wanted it to be like, because this is going out to the video game audience. This is not going out to TTRPG audience. Obviously, because Tiny Tina's Wonderlands is a video game version of a TTRPG kind of adventure story, right? With those characters in that world, you're going to have that overlap. But there's going to be people who just play video games, who are going to get this version and are going to look at this and be like, what is this? So it is a self-contained adventure. It is a one-shot that also teaches you how to play. All you need is the character sheets, print out the cards, and then you're ready to go. And it was super fun to write. It was an interesting challenge in a lot of ways. We had already made kind of Marx's adventure as a learn to play in the book, but this was like, how do we make a learn to play in a cyberpunk universe of our fantasy game? So there was some challenges there, like, what do we rename to make it work for this, and how do we get players to be like, oh, this is cool, and now they pick up Bunkers and Badasses and aren't like, whoa, this is all fantasy stuff, this is way different.
Yeah,
like, it has to feel similar to what you get in Bunkers and Badasses in this cyberpunk adventure, but it also has to be a cyberpunk adventure. yeah, it was a lot of fun. It's a great little adventure. Currently only exists in the Treasure Trove edition of the thing as like a hardcover, like the thinnest hardcover book you've ever seen. It's like 27 pages or something.
Yeah.
But it's a nice cover, and it's I have it sitting on my shelf next to.
The cover is thicker than the
book itself. Yeah, than the pages. Maybe it'll see the light of day one day.
I know. I was just thinking that. I was like, I've never actually played it. It's one that I really want to, so I need to. But also, yeah, like it would be nice one day if it was available somewhere, even as a PDF on the website or something. But I'm sure there's lots of like things behind the scenes that go into something like that.
Who knows?
Yeah, who knows? I don't know.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. And then, yeah, Sam Winkler and Anthony Birch, they wrote Shotguns and Sensibility, right?
Yep. So that was an experience of having a writer, obviously from the Borderlands side of things and a writer from the Wonderland side of things, both getting at different times. So this was different passes kind of on the same kind of adventure style. They weren't working together. They were just kind of working one after the other. So we had Anthony, who had done a lot of the work, but then when we kind of came back to it after a period of focusing on some other things, we came back to it, like getting the PDF for the source book and everything ready. And, sometimes stuff just like jumps in front of the line. We had Sam come in and kind of go over and help us like get it to the finish line as a Wonderlands adventure, which was really cool. It was really cool to like play with these characters after playing the game. Because Neogun City was like, that was all before I had even seen Tiny Tina's Wonderlands. We had put those characters into Neogun City. And then after the game, now we have Shotgun Sensibility, where we have these characters show up again, and we're like, this is Valentine, and it's Fred, and hey, Izzy's here. Yeah, so it's cool.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. Like when I read through Neogun City when I first got it, I didn't really know who any of those characters were because I had just barely gotten the game, and then playing Shotguns getting to look through and play Shotguns and Sensibility. It was so cool to be like, oh my gosh, oh yes, now I know those people. Now I know what to do there. And it's just been really entertaining to be able to like play with those characters, those newer characters in this setting. And it feels like home almost.
Yeah, it was also an adventure that we decided was to be written by Valentine, which was different than everything previous. Was always, Gray or Gray plus Tina. In this instance, it was Valentine reaching out to Gray, the in-universe designer of Bunkers and Badasses, to be like, hey, why is there an adventure about kissing and smooching? Gray responded with like, just make it yourself if that's the thing that you want. And so Valentine does. He makes this whole campaign adventure. It is not just like a one shot like Neogun City. It is a full, like, this will take you multiple sessions to make through. It was a big undertaking, but the response has been great. I've loved to see everyone diving into this adventure and just kind of accepting that, okay, we're in a Regency era fantasy world, you know what I mean? And it's much different than B&B, but also it is exactly the same. Like the heart of B&B is still very much in there. Even so much as like Fret, who in Wonderlands loves B&B so much, has like forced Valentine to include a couple more combat scenes.
Yeah. I've really loved it. I got to be a playtester on it, which is exciting. That's written in the book. So yeah, it was fun to be able to like kind of read through it and everything beforehand. And I love when modules come out because they show just how much more you can do with the system and everything. Like the combat encounters are very clever. There's very clever like other encounters throughout, right? Like it just shows like this is a very adaptable system to be able to play in Regency era, right? Like you're dating, you're courting, you're trying to romance some of those Wonderlands characters if you want, It's really entertaining. I really love it. So bravo, I guess. Was there any certain things in there that were tricky or fun for you that you really enjoyed? But I guess you don't want to spoil too much though, huh? Because it's a new thing.
Yeah, I guess, not spoiling things. We have quite a few things in there. Like there are some character additions that you could use in your games if you wanted to. We have those tied very much to like a system where people can look at you fondly or negatively based on these traits that you're given, which was kind of a new addition. In addition to like the way that traits normally work, we kind of gave them this extra layer of because this was high society, people could look at you positively or negatively just based on traits that they've heard about you, which is fun. It was like this like social dynamic. We use kind of social. There's some social encounters which hopefully have as much tension as combat encounters, but they play very differently than combat encounters.
I think those have been very entertaining. I really enjoy them, and I like that idea of the way that works. Like without going into any spoilers there. Yeah. So,
which I think is important for Bunkers and Badasses, like I said, because we know that it can be a game that can be anything. Like we like it as a system where you can tell a lot of different types of stories, but a lot of times the market really just wants you to stay in one lane and do one thing. And so we felt it was important to have these adventures in the main book and then have, Neogun City and Shotgun Sensibility as adventures instead of, maybe working on more enemies or like, like a supplemental book. Like have these adventures out there to kind of like stick our, plant our flag in the like, this is an RPG where you can tell a lot of different kinds of stories before going over and starting these starting to look at like, okay, now what kind of systems can we add to the game?
I hear people say that all the time where they're like, oh, this is good for like, kind of a one-shot thing or a short campaign. And I'm like, we've been playing for well over 60 episodes now, and we are not running short on fun or ideas or anything. Like, if anything, we have so much going on that we're just like, we just want to do more. Like, most recently, somewhat spoilery, I guess, is that there's like, I sort of introduced, like traumas that can happen from not dying, just from being like scared or, like essentially taking from like Call of Cthulhu type of thing, right? Like where it's just like, you can get an insanity. What am I saying? You can get an insanity.
He's gone mad.
Yeah. I've lost my speech. Is there anything else you want to talk about with Bunkers and Badasses?
Stay tuned. Maybe go to the Nerdvana Games website, follow the newsletter for any news of future things that may be coming out. Who knows? Maybe sooner than you think.
Ooh, very exciting. You tease. Let's take a little B&B break here and talk about what's coming up soon. I mean, the day that this comes out, Everbloom launched on Kickstarter. Right?
Yeah. And, hopefully you see this and you go there and you're like, wow, look at all of the funds that they raised on day one. This is crazy. I can't predict the future.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this. It's beautiful. The artwork on it is so, so pretty.
Yeah. So lucky to have worked with Puga Studios again, who did all the art for Bunkers and Badasses.
Oh, nice. I was going to ask. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. I don't think it's the same artist, but it's the same studio. They work with a bunch of artists and they kind of match artists with projects. I think they're called Room 8 now. I think they had a name change or bought by Room 8 something. I remember I had to look it up recently. But yeah, the name changed. But when we were working, as we were working with them, it was Puga Studios at the time, and they do fantastic art. We are so lucky to have so much wonderful art in this game, like the faction art, which if you're following Nerdvana Games, you'll have seen everywhere at this point. So much of the faction art, but also, we have these like beautifully illustrated event cards and these hybrid creatures. We have like different seasonal varieties of these hybrid creatures, as well as just like their base forms and stuff. And the biomes that they live in, also beautifully illustrated. And I think the game really can help sell the art because, the art obviously helps sell the game. But in this case, like the event cards and the faction boards and the hybrids and stuff, they all have like almost basically full art on them. So it's not something where just like, oh, look at this art. And then you go into the game and it's just like, there's a bunch of stuff in front of the art. The art is a big part of the presentation of the game. When it's on the board, it's just there and you're just looking over it. But yeah, no, it's been great to work on a board game for as long as I have. This is technically my very first game design. the first game idea I ever worked on has eventually molded itself into this. It is not that game anymore. It is very much just technically, it is my very first game design, but it does not resemble that game at all whatsoever.
Like the very first game that you designed. Obviously, you've designed like Dualosaurus and Tiny Tina's Wonderland.
Other ones kind of like went in front of it and got published before, but this one was always in the background, and it is kind of much like the creatures in the game kind of terraformed and transformed multiple times to become the game that it ended up being.
Ooh, good analogy there.
Yeah.
I've play tested it a couple times, and it is so much fun. I've had a lot of fun every time playing it, so I'm excited for people to be able to play it. But what is it? What's the game?
So it is a game that features area control and bidding, a little bit of set collection. As our product manager Marshall would say, it also features kind of resource management. But your resources are your like faction pollinators, and you take your faction chips. Each player has 4 faction chips, and every turn they're placing one of those out. They have numbers on them between like 1 and 4 usually. And that is the number of pollinators that you are sending out into the wilderness that turn. The wilderness features all of these hybrid creatures that are the cards that you are trying to recruit and bring back to your habitat for points and prosperity. And to do that, you have to distribute your pollinators to the various cards that your chip is like adjacent to in the wilderness. There's a bunch of different landmarks that you'll visit. So it's almost like a little worker placement where you place your worker, this being a chip with like a 3 on it, and then you take 3 of your pollinators, and there's like 4 cards that are connected to that landmark, and you can distribute them however you want across the 4 hybrids that are there. At the end of the phase, whoever has the most on each card wins it and adds it to their habitat, where they get to score points for it. But everyone else who bid on something and didn't win, they get to take their pollinators and place them into the groves. The groves are this like secondary location where you'll build up sort of sets of pollinators, and then you'll use those after you're done recruiting the hybrids to then pollinate them and flip them over to their full art backsides, in which will give you nectar, which nectar is very important for the end of the game. But yeah, it is a game of winning and losing, kind of, where you want to bid the most on these hybrid creatures to bring them back to your habitat, but you also need to lose some so that they end up in the groves, because you'll be pollinating from the groves. And if you don't have enough pollinators in the grove, you can't get the nectar from them. So it is a strategic game where you can win and lose strategically.
Yeah, which I really enjoyed that, because I feel dumb saying this, because it's like generally I don't love area control type stuff, which is funny because Wonderland's War is a game you designed, and it has a large part that's area control. But like, I absolutely love that game. That's like it's probably top 3 games for me.
I think I have a skill of tricking people into enjoying things that they normally wouldn't.
Yeah. See, I think that's what it is, because it's the same exact thing where when I was thinking about this earlier this week, I was like, oh, it's like worker placement and area control. And it's like, oh gosh, like, yeah, area control. There it is again, Yeah, which almost feels like worker placement where you place a worker to place more workers.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that chain reaction of double.
Yeah, it's I hardly call it a worker placement game because it doesn't necessarily fit that. You just have these chips that you're placing at landmarks. They're not necessarily workers. There is a system of like, you need to be able to follow the rule of the landmark. Sometimes you need to place a chip of a higher value than what's there, or if you place a 2 there, you get a bonus. So there is some there is some strategy of when you place things, and you can sort of get locked out of different locations if other players are being mean.
Or strategic, depending on who you're playing with.
Yes.
If you do it, it's strategic. If somebody else does it, it's mean.
Yeah. There's a lot of area control games that I don't necessarily enjoy. But like I said, with Wonderland's War, and again with this one, I've kind of built a scenario where it's area control in a way that I like, which again is one of those things where I've like reached into my brain and pulled out part of how I see the world and placed it into those games. Because it's not that I don't like area control, it's that like the way that a lot of games do area control is very all or nothing. And like with Wonderland's War and then also with this, there's a lot of like winning is strategic and losing is strategic, and going somewhere for a bonus or just going there because you know you're going to end up in this grove, which you can plan ahead to lose something and that be a part of the plan. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I love about it, is that like it's area control, sure, but like you can lose. Even if you lose, you get a benefit that is probably going to help you later. Most likely it's going to help you. And so I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed, obviously, the art and just the story of it. Like it's one of those things where it's like, this is a world when you play it. Like you feel like it's a pretty fleshed out world. And then you've got the different factions, which are great. All animal. I mean, there's
different factions of real world pollinators, which was fun to research. We did quite a bit of research on different pollinators and stuff. Yeah, so there's bats, bees, butterflies, hummingbirds, lemurs, and lizards.
My mind is being blown right now because one, I didn't think bats or lemurs or maybe even lizards, like those three I wouldn't have thought of as pollinators. They really do pollinate?
Yeah, so bats pollinate by a lot of times, obviously they're nocturnal. They'll fly out and they'll eat cactus fruit, the fruit that's on the top of cactuses, and through being messy eaters. Same with the lemurs, actually. Being messy eaters, they're like dropping the seeds on the ground, planting new cactus seeds, or flying around with the seeds and excreting them to
yes
in hand fertilizing with the seeds themselves. Same with the lemurs. They have they eat the fruits in the jungles, and they either are very messy eaters or life finds a way. Yeah, and then lizards are one of the ones that kind of like, because they crawl around on the floor, the jungle floors. A lot of times they will, either drink nectar from a flower or be scuttling around on top of flowers, and will kind of transfer pollen from like their bellies.
Oh, interesting.
From flower to flower is a thing. Yeah, there's some that like bees pollinate because they get pollen all over them, and then they go to another flower, and then they get pollen all over them into that flower. Which is a similar thing with lizards, but it's because like the way that they run around,
they just pick it up.
Yeah, they pick it up and transfer it. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is interesting. Like, is that an intentional thing they do, or is that just like this happens because they do it?
I think it's just it happens because they do it. I don't think they intend on it, but I think there are plants that like attract them with their nectar to like reinforce this.
It makes me think like, what if I walked through, like the jungle? Am I pollinating sometimes when I walk through some, some plants? I don't know. Thanks. That was cool. That's educational. And that's one of the fun things about game design too, is sometimes when you like start designing, you're like, well, what is this? How would this work? Yeah. How can I, what can I justify in this?
Next time ask me about scorpion tails and I'll go into the whole adventure on scorpion tails.
Oh no! Oh boy! Okay,
that's a different conversation.
Yeah, I'll remember. Are there any Kickstarter exclusives with Everbloom?
So we at Nerdvana Games, we like to give you the best product that we can, just right out of the box. That's why like there's a source book for B&B, and then there's the deluxe edition. There's not like, you don't have to buy the dice separately. You don't have to like go and buy like a pack of standees. Like it's all just one box. It's the deluxe edition. So it's kind of similar here, where you're going to we have a retail edition for $49, and that's just the game with the wooden faction chips, wooden UV printed meeples, pollinator meeples. There's like 107 of them. They're adorable. You got to if you go to the Kickstarter page, you'll see all of them. They're so good. And then we have like a wooden player board or wooden habitat boards. You have the faction mats that are high quality, like cardstock kind of things. Like all of these things we just have like already built in. We have 60 hybrid cards. We have 20 events. Like none of these things were like hiding behind stretch goals or anything. These are all just going to be part of the game. And then we do have a deluxe edition of the game. The deluxe edition of the game is just going to come with, I think it's $90, and it's going to come with a set of clay chips for the faction chips, and now the 25 clay chips with this crazy cool design we're cooking up currently. We're still kind of tweaking what that's going to look like, but it's probably might still be a work in progress by the time it launches. But just know, with everyone visiting and backing the game, if you like, this looks cool, it'd be cool if they had this, we will listen to you. We're still tweaking that design, so it's going to be the coolest we can make them look. Is how they're going to look. But yeah, it's got that nice like clay poker chip feel to them.
Oh, that's cool.
And then also a premium wooden insert that you can build yourself for the game that'll hold everything, all the components. Have trays for the different pollinators, and like each faction has its own tray.
That's really nice. Yeah, I love any sort of thing that helps me get the game to the table easier.
Yeah.
That plays a big part. It's the same with like Wonderlands War, the deluxe edition on that. Like once I got that, it was like, oh my gosh, this is so much easier to set up now.
Yeah. Yeah. But ours is fully wooden, so we're trying to do more sustainable things. We're looking at, like, if we're doing plastic bags, maybe the recyclable plastic ones, or the paper bands on the cards to shrink wrap, that kind of thing. Just obviously because nature and flowering and flowers and stuff, and nature is a big part of the theme. So we want to make sure that the game itself is as sustainable as we can make it. That's
really cool. I admire that. Is that going to be part of the plan going forward as well for future games?
Yeah, I think so. As long as as long as it makes sense for whatever product we're doing next. Always sustainability and giving players the most deluxe version of the thing every time.
Very cool. Well, obviously we could chat all day, but you've got games to make. Is there anything else you want to say before you go?
If you check out the Kickstarter, if you end up backing it, say hey in the comments, tell them that Riley sent you. I'll be in there like every day. I'll be checking comments. That's just what I do while a Kickstarter is going. And if you play Bunkers and Badasses, thank you so much. Like if it's brought any joy to your life, just know that you've brought joy to mine. That's kind of why we do things. So
perfect. Yeah, you've brought a lot of joy to my life. I mean, yeah, this podcast would not exist, I think, without you, so bravo. Thank you, Ian.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for listening, badasses. I hope you enjoyed that chat. It was really, really fun to do. I always love chatting with Ian. He's just rad. So cool. Hopefully you learned some things about maybe making an RPG, or how Bunkers and Badasses work, or just making games in general. I found it very insightful in a lot of ways. It was cool to be able to dive into Bunkers and Badasses like we never have before. And it was also really cool to talk about Everbloom. Again, I've play tested it twice. I love it. I really think it's a lot of fun. And the art is so beautiful for it. It complements the game. Definitely go check it out. It should be on Kickstarter by the time this episode airs. I will put a link in the episode description, so you can just go to there, click on it. It'll take you to Kickstarter. Check it out, see if it's something that you are interested in, and back it if you are. Now, if this was your first time joining us, cool, welcome. Thanks for listening. There are a couple of other chats like this. I chatted with Jim Ferranda, who's a voice actor. Most recently, he's Claptrap in Borderlands 3 and Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, but he's been in all of the Borderlands main games, so he various people. That was a really fun chat talking about voice acting, Borderlands, all that stuff. And he's also really awesome. And then there's another chat with Michael Caro. That was a lot of fun too. He was the composer for Tiny Tina's Wonderlands and future projects. Tease, 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 what else are they working on? And that was also really cool to hear how music is made and done in video games. Like, that was so fascinating to me. So you can definitely go check those out. And interviews aren't normally what we do. I like doing them because that's kind of where I got my start with the Board Game Community Show. And that's also how I got to know Ian, was through the Board Game Community Show. But what we normally do is an actual play where we're playing Bunkers and Badasses. We have so much fun doing it. It starts off much like any Borderlands game would, where it's very silly, fun. There's mayhem, action, comedy. But then eventually we do get dark, which I think is also very Borderlands, where it takes some dark turns, and you find yourself caring about these goofy characters. So I'm very, very proud of the show, where it started, what it's become. But we still also have plenty of mayhem, comedy, action, all that jazz. So if that interests you, go check it out. Ian plays Drake Wilson, so of course you could even start with those episodes. So if you just want to go check out the adventures with Ian, you can. Episode 8 is called Seas 5. That's the first episode where he comes in. It was a lot of fun. There's not really any spoilers for main stuff in there, other than a slight thing of like the end of the episode before, but it's sort of a self-contained type of thing. And then episode 32, And Where Do the Vault Hunters Go? That one does have kind of some major spoilers at the beginning. So I maybe wouldn't recommend starting with that one or listening to that one if you intend to listen to everything else. But I absolutely love that episode. So fun. Ian is he's so great playing Drake Wilson. He's also doing a Patreon adventure for us. So he's been running us through Honey Heist from the source book. So you can go check that out if you go support us on Patreon. There's 2 episodes out of that. More to come every month. If you want to follow us on social media at FFAdventureCo, pretty much on all the socials. You can join our Discord no matter how far or not far into the show you are. Links for that can be found in the episode description as well, our link tree. You can find all our socials there. I think that's it. So go check out Everbloom. Back it if you're interested. I know I will be. And then, yeah, I'm done. Toodaloo, badasses.
Vault Hunter, I'll watch your back.